All right, y'all, we're going to remove this tire to replace the strut on the passenger side of this car. What you want to do before you jack it up is loosen the lug nuts. Don't take them off, just loosen them. All right, y'all, once the tire's up, then you remove the lug nuts, take it off. You want to take the brake line off right here. It's a 12 millimeter. We're going to take the two 22 millimeter bolts and nuts, and we're going to use a breaker bar for that with an impact socket. You don't have to use an impact socket, that's just what we have. And a 1/2 inch ratchet with a 22 millimeter socket. She has a breaker bar right there on the nut side and a little cheater bar right there to get some leverage. 156 foot-pounds on those bolts, y'all. Sister got it. We've taken the 1/2 inch ratchet off the other side, the bolt side, and put it on this side because we have limited room for leverage here. We've put on a long cheater bar. The bolt is not moving. Oh, hey. You want to leave the top bolt in and go to the top. It's the 3 mounting bolts my sister is pointing to. You loosen those. Those are 14 millimeter. Here's how she's getting the top bolt out. She's got her knee up against the caliper area. She's got her hand down here, so she's pulling up and pushing with the knee that hub in to release the tension on that bolt.
Because you won't get it out by just your hand.
Now that hub may fall forward a bit, so have something to support it underneath. Now release the 3 14 millimeter mounting bolts. If you're doing it by yourself, put your hand down at the bottom to hold that strut as it wants to fall. Now that strut is going to drop. She's going to take it out toward the back of the car because you have the brake line in front. What I'm taking off the vehicle is a Monroe quick strut. And they just did not work out on my car. They didn't work out. I won't use them again. I'm using the KYB struts and using my OEM springs. So I'm just going to rebuild mine. I don't think you get any better than the tensile in your original OEM springs. I would recommend you rebuild a strut and keep your OEM springs. Those can't be matched with aftermarket, or at least the quick strut type stuff. At the top, mine's pretty good. My boot or bellow, Toyota calls it a dust cover. Mine's good, it's not torn, I'm going to reuse it. It has the insulator built in. It's 1 unit. It's got a bump stop in there, and I've taken a peek at it. It looks to be okay. Nonetheless, I'm going to use it because it'll be fine. We're going to start working on this strut to compress it. First, what we're going to do, y'all, we're going to just do some lines with some whiteout in reference to that dot down here. We got these. We at AutoZone Loaner Tool. They are McPherson spring compressors. Just an OEM brand, they're very standard there. There's little pins you engage. These little guys right here for safety once you start compressing the spring. You want these engaged. You see that? They pull out when you're putting it on. Before you start compressing the spring, you want those engaged. Here's what you have to be careful with about where you place these spring compressors. You want this on this compressor, you want it as close to this bottom area as you can get it, because what happens is as you compress this spring, it draws it in and gives you more clearance here. If you go down any further, you can't get these two at 180 because it will start as it is now. That's a real fun job to have to tighten that because it starts to hit this what's called top plate and the strut mount. So you might have to work with it a couple of times and move these to configure them in a way where you're not going to be hitting the top plate or the strut mount or down here on the bottom. Okay, y'all, we're going to start tightening. We're just using a little cotton swab, some gear oil in a little container, putting in a couple of drops on as we go. You can use 3/4 or 19 millimeter on these spring compressors. It will get to a point where you can't use a socket, so you have to use an open wrench on that. But you see how it's hitting? One, you can't get it up there. You can't get
ratchet
past that. And the other tools we have, the socket would get in the way and start touching. So we're going to use an open wrench on that side now. This is starting to move the strut mount, y'all, the top, but don't think it's time to release it. Until you feel play free, this spring free, don't take off that top nut because it will spring this coil and that's dangerous. We're putting a little bit more lube. It starts to get really tough to turn it, y'all. That oil does help. At some point, you'll feel this spring get loose.
It's loose.
Y'all see that? The spring is moving, y'all. You'll feel it. Can you steady that? No. The spring is movable. You see it down there? So now it's safe to take off the nut up there. Okay. You position these springs at 180, right? They're 180 or as close as you can get them. Really, 180 is preferred. You see the safety pins are engaged right there. We're not going to pull them out, but it's very easy to push them in and pull them out. As you're going, it's good to have a little bit of gear oil, which we have right there. And you add it right to that side as you're tightening these, because it makes it go easier. We're going to take the nut off now, which is on top.
On there.
Okay, 19 millimeter to take off the nut. And we're going to use some vice grips, tighten it around this rod, this strut rod right here. Otherwise the strut rod will spin and you won't get that off. So this is just a little cheater bar that we use for leverage. Okay, y'all see how that's moving? Yep, release. So I've got the rod and it's not moving, and we're going to slowly take that off.
Go on.
Now we're going to take the strut mount off. This just comes right off. And then you have your lovely bearing. We'll have to take off what's called the top plate. With the top plate on these OEMs, comes the boot. Now the bump stop, we can just take this out now. Good boy. This goes the flat surface up. So we're going to take that off. Here's the old strut. Here's the insulator. And there's the little nib that sticks through that lets you know that you're putting your insulator in correct. We're not going to reuse that, but it's a good reference point. Don't remove this. It's a good reference point of where the old spring went. It'll stop right about there. Y'all see it? Here's the new KYB XLG strut. This nut comes with it. It's a locking nut. Now we're going to put the insulator on. And again, I'm using the KYB insulator. And the number on that is SM5441. It's for both the left and right front. They're different for the back. You put this little guy in over here, the little nibby thing. The little nib right there, little protrusion goes right in that hole. and lines up. That's lined up in there. That's a perfect fit. We're going to put the bump stop on. My sister's got to watch me like a hawk. It's got to go below the little curved area, little notches. Got to go below there, because when you put that strut mount on, you depress it and it locks itself right here. Alrighty now. Then you line up your spring in your new strut assembly, and this is where the rubber starts meeting the road on these things. I mean, it becomes importante. The bump stop is on, and below the little
Notches.
yeah
Kerf.
there you go. Strut mount will be depressed on there and engage. You'll feel it go click and engage. Now sister's going to pack that bearing. Another thing is, if that bearing's pulled out, she'll pull it out in a minute. Just pulls right out like that. The red face goes down. We're not taking it apart, y'all, which you can take them apart and repack them, but we're not going to. So whatever you'd like to do with that. So I'm going to give her some grease, white lithium grease. About that amount, she'll start with that. This is really old stuff, y'all, see? Works like a charm. There are probably experts that know how to do this right. This is just old school way, shoving it in till it comes out.
Kind of looks like it's starting to maybe come out there.
Mm-hmm. So we're just going to push that through, and then once that bearing's cleaned up, we're going to put it on the
Back on its perch.
strut mount. I'm going to clean that off right now too. So we line the spring up about 1/4 of an inch from where this area starts to come up, the little valley there, which is the same as that guy right there. See, right there, it starts to come up. It ended there before, and we think it's ending there again. It's right there, y'all. So now what we're going to do is put the top insulator slash boot slash everything together, because that's the way the OEMs were.
This little divot.
You see that divot right there? That's where the spring ended before. Can you
And
point
there's
out
the
the end of it?
spring.
There it is. So that's where we're going to get it. So I'll hold that up. That's what she's looking for. You may have to look underneath that to
There
see.
it is.
So it's seated there. There it is.
She needs to
She
kinda-
just seated it down all the way. It just sits back there like it was before, which helps keep all this. You see how that's kind of loose in there? That's all going to be straightened out by the old strut mount. See the notches here, y'all? Right there. We're going to take that strut mount and we're going to wiggle it back and forth until it seats into those notches. You will feel it seat, and then you can rotate it back and forth. You'll get an idea of how it feels. We had a hard time lining this one up because the way it was put on before, the out arrows were off. We're going to have to put the bearing on first and then the strut mount. So here we go. Otherwise it'll come out when we're putting it on. See that? It says O-U-T, out. This way. This lines up with where you screw the knuckle in down there. That arrow is out. There's arrows on top of that strut mount that point out, and those have to line up. Those have to line up right there with that arrow.
Is it on your other thing?
Yes.
Okay.
You're going to need to move your finger, though. There you go. Now, I know that those arrows are there. I'm going to press it down a little bit and try to get her in. Okay. I've got something. So you see how this is engaged, y'all? You see how it comes to stop either way? That is now, that mount, strut mount, is now squarely in its little notches. So let's see how it lines up. We are good with that down there. We're going to put that nut on right there. It's just,
That makes it the lock nut, the little nylon portion.
Now I'm pressing down that strut mount. My sister does that. Let's see that everything's lined up. We're gonna tighten it a little bit. We're gonna torque it when it's on the car.
She's pressing down to keep
Yep.
it kind of immobile, to keep the rod immobile.
It's to keep the strut mount in place on its notches.
because
Okay. Watch this, y'all. See that? It goes to a certain point. That's the notches stopping it. So you know that the rod, the strut mount, is engaged on the notches on the rod. See those two arrows? That one and that one? You want that area in between right there to line up down there with that hole that I'm pointing to. And that hole is right above the area in the strut assembly that you attach the knuckle to. So what will happen is as we tighten this, this will want to move. At some point it won't move anymore because there's so much tension on it. But we're going to keep tightening, and I've got to make sure those are lining up to the hole down there or my sister. So that's what we're going to do, and at a point it'll stop and it'll still be a little bit movable. So that's where we're going to leave this to torque it back on the car.
And that will start putting pressure from the springs back up against this
You
whole
bet it
area.
will.
So this won't move like, move your front thumb. It won't move like this. It'll start moving a little bit tighter.
It'll be harder to move, y'all, because there'll be tension on that. All right, y'all, we're going to start loosening the spring compressors on this strut. We're going to be keeping an eye on those two arrows that are really difficult to see right there. Those two arrows need to line up with the arrow in here and the hole down there. So as you're releasing the spring compressors, you all want to keep an eye on those two arrows up there and make sure that they're certainly falling between the arrow and there, right in between them. So that's what we're going to do. So as we're loosening, we're going to adjust this strut mount a little bit to line up. Y'all, we put a little white mark there with some white out, which lines up between those two arrows, so we don't have to keep looking on that side. To make a little bit of a sound we know likes, we're going to put a little oil on her. Let's check our dot. Dot's perfectly lined up. It's almost there, y'all. All right. All right, y'all, the strut's back together. We're going to bring that strut from the rear of the car and right up there. Sister's going to bring it in. I'm going to be at the top. All right, y'all, the bolts are through. The mounting bolts, I'm just going to tighten these a little bit. One toward the driver's side is to stop, and the other ones are. All right, y'all, now we're going to go below, get that strut into the knuckle there. All right, y'all, she's putting the bottom bolt in right now, so she can then pivot that hub.
People just need to jiggle it a little bit to get them in. That's good.
Okay, we're going to put the nuts on a little bit, then tighten the mounting bolts up at the top, torque them, and then we're going to come back down and torque these. Mounting bolts torqued to 59 foot-pounds. Now we're going to torque the 22 millimeter bolts to 156 foot-pounds. Don't forget to put the brake line back on, the 12 millimeter. Now we're going to torque that bolt to 21 foot-pounds. And that's how we rebuild and replace a strut on a 3rd generation Camry. Hope it helps, and happy DIYing.